February 23rd, 1945. The wind carried the sharp scent of sulfur and death across the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima. Mount Suribachi loomed above like a silent god, its slopes scarred by shellfire and smoke. Below, tens of thousands of Marines clawed their way through ash and steel toward an enemy dug so deep into the island that it seemed the earth itself was alive and resisting. Every inch of Iwo Jima was paid for with blood. For 72 hours, men had fought across terrain that absorbed bullets and muffled explosions. Japanese defenders, hidden in a labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, and fortified bunkers, waited for the perfect moment to strike. They were ghosts in the rock, invisible, disciplined, and determined to die rather than surrender. The American assault had begun days earlier with a thunderous naval bombardment, the most intense of the Pacific War. Over 450 ships surrounded the island, turning it into an inferno. Yet when the Marines landed, the enemy was still there, untouched, watching. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had studied the American way of war. He knew the futility of meeting the invasion head-on. Instead, he ordered his men to remain silent through the bombardment, waiting underground until the beaches were clogged with U.S. troops, then unleash their fire. The plan worked with deadly precision. Within minutes of landing, hundreds of Marines were cut down. The beaches offered no cover, only soft volcanic ash that swallowed boots and stalled vehicles. Men dropped where they stood, trying to dig foxholes in ground that refused to yield. But retreat was never an option. For the Americans, Iwo Jima was more than another island. It was a stepping stone to Japan itself. Its airfields lay halfway between the Mariana Islands and Tokyo, perfect for emergency landings and fighter escorts for the B-29 superfortresses that rained destruction on the Japanese mainland. Capturing it meant saving thousands of American airmen in the long campaign ahead. For Kuribayashi, holding it meant buying time. Time for Japan to prepare to regroup, perhaps to negotiate an end to the war on less humiliating terms. Both sides understood the stakes. As dawn broke on the fourth day, Marines from the 28th Regiment began their slow, punishing climb up Mount Suribachi. Every step was contested. Grenades rolled down the slopes like raindrops. Machine gun bursts chewed the air. Yet, inch by inch, they advanced, driven by exhaustion, anger, and a deep, wordless determination. When they reached the summit and planted the stars and stripes, it was not a victory yet. It was a heartbeat of defiance. Below, the battle still raged, but that image, 5 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman raising the flag, would become immortal. It captured something beyond tactics or strategy, the essence of endurance. That moment would echo across America. Yet behind that symbol of triumph lay 43 more days of relentless fighting as both armies bled each other dry. Out of 21,000 Japanese soldiers, only a few hundred were captured alive. Nearly 7,000 Americans never left the island. Iwo Jima became a graveyard carved into volcanic rock, and a testament to the cost of victory. Even as the stars and stripes fluttered atop Mount Suribachi, the island below remained a living hell. The Marines holding that mountain could see the entire 8-square-mile battlefield, a landscape that looked like the surface of another planet, cratered, smoldering, and scarred with trenches. But visibility meant little when the enemy was invisible. The Japanese weren't fighting a conventional defense. Kuribayashi had transformed Iwo Jima into a fortress unlike anything the Americans had faced. Beneath the volcanic surface stretched an underground city, more than 11 miles of tunnels, interconnected bunkers, command posts, supply chambers, and even hospitals. Every inch had been designed to withstand artillery fire. Many tunnels were lined with steel beams or reinforced with concrete, some deep enough to survive direct naval shelling. The U.S. commanders quickly realized that firepower alone wouldn't win this battle. They had to dig the enemy out, inch by inch, with flamethrowers, grenades, and raw willpower. Each bunker had to be cleared manually, often at the cost of entire squads. Marines learned that silence meant danger. The Japanese would let them pass, then re-emerge behind their lines, cutting them down in deadly ambushes. Day after day, the same grim pattern repeated. The Marines advanced by yards, not miles. Each ridge, Motoyama, Nishi, and Kitano, became its own separate battle. The terrain itself worked against them. Soft volcanic sand offered no footing, tanks bogged down and vehicles sank. The heat was unbearable, and water was scarce. Wounded men often lay exposed for hours because evacuation was nearly impossible under constant sniper fire. Kuribayashi's men fought to the death, not because they expected to win, but because they believed that dying in battle was the only honorable choice left. His orders were clear: do not expect to return alive. Unlike previous Japanese commanders who launched futile banzai charges, Kuribayashi forbade wasteful attacks. He wanted to inflict the maximum number of casualties possible. His strategy was psychological, to make the Americans pay so dearly that they would hesitate before invading the Japanese mainland. By early March, the U.S. Marines had suffered nearly 20,000 casualties. Every night, new graves appeared along the beaches. Medics worked endlessly, treating wounds that never seemed to stop coming. The smell of sulfur, smoke, and death hung over the island like a curse. Yet, even in that nightmare, acts of courage and humanity emerged. Marines shared their last canteens with wounded comrades. Navy corpsmen crawled through fire to reach the injured, dragging them back to safety one by one. Pilots risked their lives to deliver supplies under enemy fire. And at night, when the gunfire faded, the men could hear the eerie sound of Japanese soldiers singing, ancient war songs echoing through the tunnels. It was haunting, a reminder that beneath the hatred, both sides were human. For Kuribayashi, the battle was already lost, but he refused to surrender. He knew that every passing day was a victory of defiance. His letters home revealed a man torn between duty and despair. In one of his final notes to his wife, he wrote, "The battle is going as I expected. I shall not see you again. I pray that our country will endure." The Japanese fought until there was no one left to fight. On March 26, 1945, after 5 weeks of unrelenting slaughter, Iwo Jima was declared secured. Yet even then, hundreds of Japanese soldiers remained hidden in tunnels, emerging at night to attack supply lines. It took months before the island was completely silent. The cost was staggering: nearly 7,000 Americans dead, more than 19,000 wounded. Of the 21,000 Japanese defenders, only about 200 were captured alive. Iwo Jima was more than a battle. It was a massacre on both sides, fought with absolute conviction and no mercy. When the fighting finally ended, the Marines raised another flag, this time not for a photograph, but for remembrance. The black sands that had swallowed so many lives would become sacred ground, a symbol of the unbreakable human spirit. Yet Iwo Jima was not the end. It was the beginning of the final blood-soaked chapter of the Pacific War. For beyond this island lay Okinawa, a place that would make Iwo Jima look like a prelude. The black sands of Iwo Jima had barely cooled. before U.S. planners turned their eyes toward Okinawa, the final gateway to Japan itself. The island stretched just 60 miles long, but its position made it priceless. From Okinawa, American bombers could strike Tokyo at will, and the fleet could prepare for an invasion of the home islands. But what lay ahead would be worse than anything seen in the Pacific. The Japanese High Command understood this too. If Iwo Jima was a fortress, Okinawa was to become a graveyard. Nearly 120,000 Japanese soldiers and an estimated 30,000 local Okinawan conscripts fortified every hill, cave, and village. Civilians were told to fight or die, rather than be captured. The Japanese strategy was simple: make the Americans bleed until their spirit broke. On April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War began. The U.S. 10th Army, 180,000 troops, supported by 1,500 ships, landed on the beaches of Okinawa. At first, there was eerie silence. No resistance, no machine gun fire. The Marines thought the Japanese were retreating, but it was a trap. Kuribayashi's defensive strategy had been adopted again. As the Americans advanced inland, Japanese forces unleashed an inferno. Artillery hidden in the hills erupted with deadly precision. Kamikaze pilots hurled themselves at the U.S. fleet, turning the sky into a storm of fire. Over 1,900 kamikaze attacks struck ships around Okinawa, sinking dozens and killing thousands of sailors. The sea itself burned. For the men on the ground, the battle was a nightmare of mud, blood, and madness. The Japanese fought from underground caves, bunkers, and tunnels, forcing the Americans into a war of attrition. Every ridge had to be taken by hand with grenades, flamethrowers, and bayonets. Rain turned the battlefield into a swamp. Bodies sank into the mud and disappeared. At Shuri Line, the main Japanese defense, the fighting reached biblical levels of destruction. Marines and soldiers battled for weeks over the same ridges: Sugarloaf Hill, Kakazu Ridge, and Wana Draw. Each position was taken and retaken several times. Japanese artillery fire was so intense that medics could not retrieve the wounded. Men called for help and received silence because to move meant death. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, commander of U.S. forces, described it as a meat grinder. For the Japanese commander, General Mitsuru Ushijima, it was a suicide mission. He knew Okinawa could not be held, but he fought to delay the inevitable, to give Japan time to prepare for the invasion of the mainland. By May, Okinawa had become a vision of apocalypse. Entire villages burned. Civilians caught between both armies leapt from cliffs to escape the flames. Mothers drowned their children rather than let them fall into enemy hands. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand in the ruins of Naha City, the capital, now reduced to ash. The psychological toll was devastating. U.S. Marines who had fought at Iwo Jima said Okinawa was worse, not because of the scale, but because of the hopelessness. There was no front line, no rest, no safety. The enemy could be anywhere. Behind a rock, in a cave, under a pile of bodies. By June 22, 1945, the island was declared secure. But victory came at a staggering cost. Over 12,000 Americans killed and 36,000 wounded. More than 100,000 Japanese soldiers dead. At least 40,000 Okinawan civilians killed, though some estimates reach 100,000. When General Ushijima realized defeat was certain, he gathered his officers, bowed, and performed seppuku, ritual suicide, on a hillside overlooking the battlefield. His chief of staff followed. Their bodies were buried together under a simple stone marker that still stands today. Okinawa had shown the world what an invasion of Japan would look like, and it terrified American planners. If one small island had cost over 200,000 lives, what would happen when U.S. troops landed on the Japanese mainland, where millions were prepared to fight to the death? The answer to that question would come from the sky, in a way that would change humanity forever. By July 1945, the war that had consumed the planet for 6 years was collapsing and mutating into something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The Third Reich had already fallen. Hitler was gone. Berlin lay in ruins, a hollow monument to ambition and madness. But in the Pacific, Japan still fought on, and what was left of the empire, surrounded, starved, desperate, refused to surrender. Every island taken so far had been bought with blood. Iwo Jima had shown what it would cost to step foot on the Japanese homeland. Okinawa proved it beyond doubt. If the Americans invaded Japan itself, military planners predicted 1 million Allied casualties and perhaps 10 million Japanese deaths. In Washington, President Harry S. Truman, barely months into office after Roosevelt's sudden death, was told something both astonishing and terrifying. A weapon, unlike anything ever built, the result of a secret project that had cost $2 billion and stretched across the entire continent. It could end the war, or end something much larger. That project was called Manhattan. In the deserts of New Mexico, on July 16, 1945, the night turned into day. A blinding flash, a fireball rose into the sky, boiling the air, turning sand into glass, and shattering the dawn. The scientists watching from bunkers were silent. Some cheered, others wept. Oppenheimer remembered a line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." That morning, humanity crossed an invisible line, and no one truly understood what it meant. In Tokyo, the Japanese leadership was divided between hardliners and realists. General Anami and the army command believed Japan could still negotiate better surrender terms through attrition if they could bleed the Americans further. Prime Minister Suzuki and Emperor Hirohito, however, knew the truth. Japan was collapsing. Tokyo had been firebombed. 66 cities across Japan were already ashes. 100,000 civilians had died in a single night in the firestorm of Tokyo. Factories gone, railways shattered, millions homeless, yet still no surrender. American intelligence decoded Japan's communications. They knew the emperor wanted peace, but only if he could remain on the throne. The U.S. demanded unconditional surrender. Neither side would move. Truman faced a choice no leader had faced before: invade and lose hundreds of thousands of his own men, or use a weapon that could end the war instantly, but open the door to annihilation. August 6, 1945. At 8:15 a.m., a B-29 superfortress named Enola Gay appeared over Hiroshima. Inside the bomb bay rested a single device, codenamed Little Boy, uranium-based, 9,000 pounds, equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The bomb fell silently for 43 seconds. Then the city vanished, a sphere of fire a mile wide. The temperature at the center, hotter than the surface of the sun. Steel melted, stone vaporized. Human shadows were burned into walls. Within minutes, 70,000 people were dead. By the end of the year, radiation and injuries would kill another 100,000. But in Tokyo, there was silence. The army insisted Japan fight on. They refused to believe one bomb could destroy a city. 3 days later, the second warning came.
August 9th, 1945, a second B-29, Boxcar. Its target? Kokura. But clouds obscured the city, so it turned toward the secondary target, Nagasaki. The bomb, Fat Man, was more powerful, plutonium-based. At 11:02 a.m., it detonated over the Urakami Valley. Another city obliterated. Another 70,000 lives erased in seconds. By then, the Japanese leadership could no longer deny what had happened. That night, Emperor Hirohito summoned his council. For the first time in Japanese history, the emperor himself spoke in the Supreme War Council. He said simply, "The time has come to bear the unbearable." On August 15th, his voice, the voice no ordinary Japanese citizen had ever heard, echoed across the radio waves. "We have resolved to endure the unendurable and suffer what must be suffered, to pave the way for peace." The war was over. Across the Pacific, sailors stood on decks, speechless. Marines who'd been told to expect an invasion cheered, then sat down in silence. In New York, London, Paris, the streets erupted with celebration. But in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, only ashes remained. World War II had ended, but humanity had stepped into a new age, an age where peace itself stood on the edge of extinction. On September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay, Japanese Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed the Instrument of Surrender. General Douglas MacArthur, towering at the podium, spoke words the world would never forget. "It is my earnest hope that from this solemn occasion, a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past, a world founded upon faith and understanding." The pens scratched on paper, cameras clicked. The war that began with the roar of aircraft over Pearl Harbor ended in the stillness of Tokyo Bay. In the ruins of Hiroshima, survivors walked through a landscape of silence. Children searched for parents who would never return. Doctors treated patients dying of a sickness no one understood. Radiation poisoning. And among the ruins, a few green shoots began to appear, tiny plants forcing their way through the blackened earth. It was a reminder that even after the worst horrors mankind could unleash, life found a way. World War II claimed over 70 million lives. Cities were burned, nations erased, borders redrawn. Empires fell, new powers rose, and humanity came face to face with the limits of its own creation. But within that darkness, stories of courage, sacrifice, and hope still shone. From the beaches of Normandy to the skies over Britain, from the frozen forests of Bastogne to the sands of Iwo Jima. And in every corner of the world, men and women fought not just for victory, but for the belief that freedom and decency could survive even the apocalypse. As the world rebuilt from the ashes, the survivors of that generation carried one message: that war is not glory, but tragedy, and peace is not weakness, but wisdom. If this story moved you, then help us keep their memory alive. Like this video so that others can discover the forgotten truths of history. Subscribe and stay connected, because in our next journey, we'll uncover another chapter of courage and consequence from the Second World War. And as the screen fades to black, remember, the past isn't just history. It's a warning and a promise.